So again, thank you all for being here. I would especially like to welcome our panelists. Reverend Barber, you have blessed me on many occasions with wise counsel and with words of encouragement. We thought we would also have Reverend Theoharis with us today, but unfortunately she is being detained in jail for praying yesterday on the front steps of the United States Supreme Court. That's a moment when we know that we're starting to have an impact, that people are starting to fear because they know that the People's March will make change. To all our witnesses who are here today, welcome. We realize that you took away time from your jobs, from your families, from other commitments to be here with us. You honor us by your presence. We're grateful that you're here. 50 years ago, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King called for a mass mobilization of America's poor and disenfranchised. His vision was to convene thousands of suffering and outraged citizens from across America and to bring them right here to Washington, D.C., to demand that the United States government confront and address the evil of poverty, the evil of poverty. In his letter announcing the mobilization, Dr. King warned that America was at a crossroads of history and that it was critically important for America as a nation, as a society, to choose a new path and to move upon it with resolution and courage. Dr. King didn't make it to Washington, D.C. He was assassinated just a month before the march, but his vision lived on. Thousands of poor people, energized by the vision of a new America that set up camp in Washington, D.C., to demand that the government look, listen, and act. It was a movement that challenged Americans to come together across racial and ethnic and geographic lines for the cause of justice. 50 years later, America is at a crossroads. Progress remains even more elusive for tens of millions of struggling and hardworking Americans. Our safety net has a hole in it the size of a monster truck. Millions of Americans are without basic health care. Babies drink water laced with lead. 40% of U.S. adults don't have $400 to cover an emergency, and many have nowhere to borrow it. Over 1 in 4 Americans describes themselves as, quote, just getting by, or, quote, struggling to get by. Nearly half of all Americans don't have a single dollar put away for retirement. The list goes on and on. And all the while, corporate profits in America are skyrocketing. There is a crisis in America. It is an economic crisis. It is a social crisis. It is an environmental crisis. It is a moral crisis. This government works well. It works really well for the rich and the powerful, but it turns a deaf ear to the cries and the voices of the hurting. This is a moral crisis. And we're here today because there's something happening in America. The poor and the marginalized and the suffering are taking to the streets and our capitals across this country to reclaim our government and demand a government for all the people. The Poor People's Campaign is the tip of the spear in this fight. It has launched a season of direct action to unite tens of thousands of people across this country to fight for the soul of America. And the campaign has called on Congress to hear directly from those people. We are here to respond to that call. We are honored to have our participants with us today. I am glad to be here, to have the chance to hear your voices, and I'm glad to be joined by so many of my colleagues in Congress. Before I conclude, I want to thank my co-chair, Congressman Cummings. You are a fearless fighter for justice and a fighter for all Americans. You have devoted your life to a deeply moral battle. I am grateful for your leadership. I am grateful for your partnership. And with that, I will turn the microphone over to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren, and I want to thank you so much for organizing today's event to shine a bright light on the poverty in America. I also thank our colleagues who are joining us from the Senate and the House. Most of all, I want to thank our panelists and all of you who have taken a moment out of your lives to be here today. Reverend Dr. Barber, and I want to thank you for your leadership and your dedication to speaking up for those who too often cannot speak up for themselves, for those who are in so much pain they don't even know they're in pain. To our esteemed panelists, Christopher Olive, Pamela Sue Rush, Nick Smith, Vanessa Noyes, and Amy Jo Hutchinson, your courage is inspiring, and I'm truly thankful for what you all have done, and I thank you for traveling here to be with us today. One of President Obama's most significant accomplishments was pulling our nation out of the Great Recession. Under his leadership, we experienced 75 straight months of job growth over his 2 terms, and our unemployment rate was cut in half. Despite this accomplishment, our work was not complete. Far too many people are still not participating in our growth or benefiting from our nation's success. On September 12, 2017, the Census Bureau issued its latest annual report on poverty. In that report, the Census Bureau reported that in 2016, there were more than 40 million Americans living in poverty. Even as the stock market soars, we see what has been called an epidemic of deaths of despair. These deaths from drug overdoses, alcohol-related liver failure, and suicide are preventable, but they are increasing so rapidly that life expectancy in the United States has actually fallen over the last 2 years. Some of the most significant increases in preventable deaths have been in middle-aged Americans with no more than a high school education. 2 Princeton University researchers, Ann Case and Angus Deaton, wrote in a paper published last year by the Brookings Institution that there may be a, quote, cumulative disadvantage from one birth cohort to the next in the labor market, in marriage, and in child outcomes, and in health, end of quote. According to these researchers, this disadvantage is being triggered by progressively worsening labor market opportunities. Unfortunately, rather than prioritizing policies that will help reverse these trends by expanding educational opportunities, helping families afford the staggering costs of higher education, or ensuring that more Americans benefit from our economic growth, President Trump signed into law massive tax cuts for corporations and millionaires, while at the same time hurting many hard-working families. An analysis produced by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities found that by 2025, the Republican tax law will increase the incomes of households making more than $1 million by more than $25,000, while at the same time reducing the after-tax incomes of households making less than $30,000. These attacks against the poor and middle class are not limited to the tax code. Republicans have been trying to gut the Affordable Care Act for the past decade. Now the Trump administration is going on the offensive in court, arguing that the Affordable Care Act's prohibition against discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions should be ruled unconstitutional. By the way, if you don't have a pre-existing condition, just keep on living. One of the most heartbreaking causes of bankruptcy in America is the inability of families to pay for exorbitant medical costs. If Republicans succeed in eliminating this protection of people with pre-existing conditions, we will go back to the old days before the Affordable Care Act, when insurance companies could jack up prices for specific diseases or specific people. And as I close, or worse, insurance companies could simply deny coverage altogether. Remember that? Of course, things do not have to be that way. We can adopt positive policies that will create new jobs and opportunities. We can expand access to health care. We can give tax breaks to working families. We can make college more affordable. We can expand job training. And we can expand treatment for the millions of Americans currently suffering from substance abuse. And so I hope today's forum will help make clear why it is so urgent that we begin enacting policies to ensure that everyone benefits from our nation's growth, not just those at the top. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Cummings. It's my honor to introduce our first guest, the Reverend Dr. William Barber II. Reverend Dr. Barber is co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, which has staged rallies at state houses now in over 30 states, with 6 weeks of direct action that kicked off on May 13th. He is also pastor of Greenleaf Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, located in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and a bishop with the College of Affirming Bishops and Faith Leaders. From 2006 to 2017, he served as president of the North Carolina NAACP, the largest state conference in the South, and he currently sits on the National NAACP Board of Directors. The Reverend Dr. Barber is the president and senior lecturer of Repairers of the Breach and the architect of Forward Together Moral Movement. I can tell you much, much more about Dr. Barber and his many accomplishments in the fight for justice, but in the interest of time and because I want to hear from him directly, I'll stop here and I'm going to turn the microphone over to the Reverend Dr. Barber for his opening statement.
Testing. All right. Thank you so much, Senator Warren and Representative Congressman Cummings and all of my friends here, Senator Sanders, Senator Booker, Representative Lee. I do want to make a slight adjustment. Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, who is our co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, is in jail, fortunately, because her and 8 other people, along with more than 80 of us, nearly 100 of us yesterday, were arrested in the streets, and they chose to pray on the steps of the Supreme Court on June the 11th, which was the 55th anniversary of when John Kennedy declared that civil rights was a moral issue. That was the same day this court, in a 5-4 vote, rolled back voting rights again. And today we're here on June 12th, which would be the night Medgar Evers would be being shot 55 years ago. Karina Gore has come in her stead. They've been in jail all night long, but Karina Gore is here. She's with the Center for Earth Ethics at Union, and I want to ask her to present Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis' presentation first.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, I've been asked to read a statement on behalf of my friend, teacher, and colleague, Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, and I'm very honored to do so. Senators, members of Congress, thank you for inviting us to speak with you today. Did you know that 250,000 people die in the United States from poverty and related issues every year? Callie Greer from Selma, Alabama does. Her daughter Venus died in her arms 5 years ago because she couldn't afford health insurance after the Alabama legislature refused to expand Medicaid. Venus had breast cancer, a disease that, if caught early, has a 99% survival rate. Did you know that nearly 3.5 million Americans live in shelters, transitional housing centers, and tent cities? And did you know that a significant number of those people are veterans? Christopher Olive from Grays Harbor, Washington, does. After serving our country for 4 years during the Iraq War with the Air Force, Christopher was homeless off and on for 8 to 10 years. Did you know that 13.8 million families in this country cannot afford water, and that poor rural communities face the additional problem of lacking access to piped water and sewage systems to begin with? Just ask Pamela Sue Rush from Lowndes County, Alabama. Pamela has to live with mold in her trailer while her 9-year-old daughter has to use a CPAP machine. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the faces behind the statistics. These are the men and women directly affected by the laws passed in these hallowed halls. You'll hear more directly from them shortly. But I'd like to address you from my position, speaking as Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis in her stead, as a member of the clergy and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. For over 20 years, on nearly a weekly basis, I have heard people quote Matthew 26:11. The poor will be with you always. To blame the poor for their poverty, to justify inaction in the face of growing poverty and misery, and to claim that if God wanted to end poverty, God would do so. This passage led me to seminary and biblical scholarship, and eventually to write a book on these misinterpretations. Some of the only preachers I hear talking about poverty are those who condemn the poor as sinners. Very few people talk about poverty itself as a sin against God that could and should be ended. Indeed, that line from Matthew 26:11 is what evangelical leader Jim Wallis calls the most famous Bible verse on poverty. I hear echoes of this verse when I read Dr. King's statement on true compassion from his sermon at Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967. When Jesus says, "The poor will always be with you," he is actually quoting Deuteronomy 15, which says that there will be no poor person among you if you follow God's commandments. To forgive debts, release slaves, pay people fairly, and lend money, even knowing you won't get paid back. Deuteronomy 15 continues that because people will not follow these commandments, the poor will never cease to be in the land. Thus, in this passage and throughout the Bible, Jesus isn't condoning poverty. He is reminding us that God hates poverty and has commanded us to end poverty by forgiving debts, raising wages, outlawing slavery, and restructuring society around the needs of the poor. He is reminding the disciples that charity and hypocrisy will not end poverty, but keep poverty with us always. He is reminding his followers that will soon leave them and is their responsibility to continue the quest for justice. That he will soon leave them, and it is their responsibility to continue the quest for justice. For anyone who claims to be a person of faith, this is our charge. The Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, is continuing this quest for justice. After 2 years of traveling to some of the most impoverished communities, we've met men and women like the ones you will hear from today who are fighting for change in their communities. We've been organizing in these places to build a movement for the poor, led by the poor. By listening to us today, you are now moral witnesses to our movement, and we hope you will see that poverty is not a constant, it is not a necessity. Poverty is a political creation that can be eradicated if we have the will to do so. The men and women sitting behind me and beside me today give me the will to keep fighting toward justice, and I'm certain they will inspire you to do the same.
Thank you so much, Karina. And certainly, again, we remember the 9 persons that are still in jail being arraigned this evening, including Dr. Harris and Graylin and Ross Pellis and Norm and Rob Stevens and an Episcopal priest, Hershey, who are all there, and Jimmy Hawkins with the National Presbyterian Church. I want to first thank you, Senator Warren and Senator Cummings, Representative Cummings. We sent this letter asking for this hearing to Senator McConnell and to Congressman Ryan and to all others, and we did not hear anything until we heard from you about wanting to do this joint hearing. So thank you. Let me also begin by thanking God, the God of love and justice and truth, for being here on today. And let me also lift up the poor people, the clergy, the activists in more than 40 states, who are engaging in the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival for a 40-day launch, not an end, but a launching of a multi-year campaign. Just over the past 4 weeks, more than 3,000 Americans have engaged in moral fusion, nonviolent civil disobedience at state houses around the country and here in the United States Capitol. Tens of thousands have been witnesses to this. More than 100 people were arrested here just yesterday, and 9 of them, as I said, some who are religious leaders from 3 different faith traditions. Shally, who's a Hindu, Liz and others who are Christians, and another brother who is Jewish, were arrested for exercising their right of freedom of religion. The same court that just last week said because of religion, you can deny a cake from a gay person, didn't allow people to pray on the steps of the Supreme Court. I tease folk I would have been there, but I drew the card to lead those who took the street and to make sure we had at least one person to be here this evening. Tomorrow I leave for Kentucky, where Governor Matt Bevin has blocked citizens and coal miners from even entering their state house. Then on to Detroit and Chicago for a Chicago poverty tour to stand with our organizers there before heading on Saturday to the Global Labor Council Unity Council in Liverpool, England, where workers from 101 nations are acknowledging their unity with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. This campaign, though, let us be clear, is not a commemoration of what happened 50 years ago. It is a declaration that poverty still threatens the American democracy today. It is recognizing that it was not just the King, Dr. King, it was Dr. King, Cesar Chavez, it was Heschel, it was others, welfare right workers who all called for this Poor People's Campaign, and it didn't end. In some ways, it was assassinated. Both King and Robert Kennedy were killed over the period of time of the Poor People's Campaign. Today, we have, in order to quantify and qualify our legitimate discontent, we commissioned an audit called The Souls of Poor Folk, Auditing America 50 Years After the Poor People's Campaign. Because oftentimes we even misquote, we really don't tell the full story of what's going on in America. This was done by the Institute for Policy Studies with the help of the Urban Institute and numerous scholars, theologians, and impacted people. Senator Sanders and I talked about this when he was in North Carolina at Duke University. And these policy groups, they quantified 5 interlocking injustices: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and a distorted moral narrative that continue to cause great moral and material injury to the soul of our democracy, to the people of this country, and to the quality of life of many in our world. And our campaign is not Democrat or Republican. We understand that neither the doctrines of trickle-down economics are going to lift the poor, and neither is neoliberalism that tries to deal with poverty without dealing with the issue of race and systemic racism. We understand that both parties have had struggle even saying the name poor for nearly 50 years. This is why we have launched this movement. These are not for us left issues and right issues. They are justice issues, moral issues, love issues that cannot and must not be ignored. Just like John Kennedy on June 11, 1963, he said the civil rights issue was not a sectional issue, it was a moral issue, and we're going to have to reclaim that kind of language in our discussion and dealing with these issues. These are issues that impact all people: black, white, brown, native, gay, straight, trans, Republican, Democrat, independent, people of faith, people not of faith. This is not a liberal or a conservative movement. It is a deeply moral movement. The people who are hurting the most have linked up to say, we won't be silent anymore. And coming to this hearing today, our goal, and the folk told me to say this, is not so much that they get applause, but that people cry. We are trying to make this nation weep and see what is being done and how people are having to live. The first goal of this movement is to change the moral narrative in this country. For the last 50 years, since the civil and human rights movements that called this nation to a moral reckoning, extremists in our public life have worked tirelessly to do at least two things. One, they wanted to shift our attention from government's moral responsibility to debates about tax cuts, so-called entitlements, states' rights. And they've been successful to the extent that we no longer, in a massive way, even discuss issues like poverty and militarism and systemic racism as moral issues. Even in the last cycle, we had 26 presidential election debates. And if you check the record there was not 1 hour on poverty. There was not 1 hour on systemic racism and restoring the Voting Rights Act. Not 1 hour out of 26 debates in the primary and in the general. And what we have allowed is extremists to make abortion, prayer in the school, and human sexuality the force of a moral discourse, which is counter to the Bible that many of them put their hands on. In fact, I brought this, Senator Warren, hoping that maybe you'll get them to replace all the Bibles in this place with the Poverty and Justice Bible that has every scripture, all 2,000, that talk about the poor and the stranger and the sick and what we ought to be doing. Since there are some people that love to bring up the Bible, we want to hope that they read it and really know what's in it. Number two, by narrowing our scope of moral concern, these extremists have tried to pit black, brown, and poor white people against each other, which is not a new thing, especially in some parts of the country where the balance of power could change and the nation could change radically if black, brown, and poor white people became allies. This is why we are launching a fusion movement. This is why this table looks like it does. It's intentionally uniting people who've been divided by the divide and conquer tactics of the Southern strategy that's been going on for 50 years, but not just in the South. So from Alabama to Alaska, from California to the Carolinas, from Arizona to Arkansas, from Maine to Mississippi, from the coal mines of Kentucky to the bayous of LA, from Milwaukee to Wisconsin to Marks, Mississippi, people are coming together to say that if the extremists are cynical enough to work together, to take health care, to take resources, to block living wages, we ought to be smart enough to come together and change the nation's moral narrative. Right. Now, we've launched this movement with three tactics. First, moral fusion, nonviolent civil disobedience, to drive attention. Because right now you can look at the TV for a whole month, you can read the paper for a whole month and never see anything about poverty, anything about the poor. You can hear about the middle class, the military, but never about the poor. Mm-hmm. Number two, we're going to do mass targeted voter mobilization, all of the people that are organizing across the country, and then mass power building from the bottom up. We know what we want to focus on. Our agenda is clear. It is clear. Here is the agenda. Number one, under systemic racism, we demand the immediate full restoration and expansion of the Voting Rights Act, an end to racist gerrymandering and redistricting. We want early registration of 17 and 18-year-olds. We want registration to vote at age 18. If we can be drafted for war at 18, we ought to be able to vote automatically at 18. Early voting in every state, same-day registration, and the enactment of Election Day as a holiday. Now, why? Because that's racism. Voter suppression. Racism is not just Roseanne Barr and her words. Racism is about policy. And too often in this country, when we start talking about racism, we get stuck on words and not the works of racism. The words of racism is what Barr is doing. The works of racism is trying to appoint Thomas Farr from North Carolina to the federal bench who has a history of racism. We have a little map that we'd like to show real quickly, and I'm almost through it when they bring it up, because it shows something on this map that we are showing around the country that's helping people understand why you can't deal with poverty if you don't deal with systemic racism. Mm-hmm. That map shows all the states that have participated in voter suppression laws since 2010. Note that this is before the current administration because all our problems didn't just start with this administration. That's 2010. Next map. That shows the states that have the highest child poverty. If you go back, and we'll give it to you, and look, the same states that have the worst voter suppression have the worst child poverty. Next one. The same states that have the worst voter suppression have the worst poverty rates. Next one. The same states that have the worst voter suppression have the states without living wage legislation. Next one. The same states that have the worst voter suppression also have the lack of LGBTQ non-discrimination laws. So what do we learn from those maps quickly? It is that there are people who are engaging in massive racialized voter suppression. They get elected by using racialized methods of voter suppression, but then when they get in office, they hurt mostly poor white people. That's right. Mostly poor white people. Because there are more poor white people than there are numerically than there are black people and brown people. Not as a percentage of race, but as in terms of raw numbers. We demand an end to placing persons on the federal bench who have a record of standing against voting rights. We demand clear and just immigration system that strengthens our democracy, because denying just immigration is racism. We demand that the First Nation, Native Americans, and Alaskan Native people retain their tribal recognition as nations, not races, and that they are protected, and we finally fulfill our promises to First Nation people, because not to do that is racism. We demand an end to mass incarceration and the continuing inequalities for black, brown, and poor white people, and we demand that we fight the resegregation of our public schools that doesn't just resegregate bodies, but resegregates budgets and also resegregates curriculums. Under systemic poverty, we demand the immediate implementation of a federal and state living wage laws, 15 and a union as a minimum. We want basic guaranteed annual incomes, full employment and the right of workers to join unions. We demand an end to anti-union, anti-worker laws. And one of the reasons we're doing it is because Brother Sturgill, where is he? Brother Stanley Sturgill, who was a coal miner from Kentucky, said we better do it. Where is he at? Guy in the chair, come on up here. Brother Sturgill, he's a coal miner from Harlan County, USA. And he said if there's going to be a poor people's campaign, you have to demand that we end anti-union, anti-worker rights law. We demand fully funded welfare programs for the poor and an end to the attacks on SNAP and HEAP and other vital programs. We demand equity in education, ensuring that every child receives a high-quality, well-funded, diverse public education. We demand an end to resegregation of our schools. We demand the expansion of Medicaid in every state and single-payer health care for all. Now, why is that? Why is that? Is it just because it's an idea from Reverend Barber or an idea from Senator Sanders? No. Margie Starch, who's a Republican. Where is she, Margie? Margie's here, got arrested last week. Her brother-in-law died because of the lack of health care. He was a cook in a facility taking care of older people, and he died. And Margie's a Republican. Get her a seat up there. Well, okay, well, they said you were. Okay. Somebody told a story on you anyway. But anyway, Margie said that she wants, but we also do have in our movement, even Republicans and others who are saying that health care should be a fundamental right. We also demand fully funded public resources and access to mental health, professional, and addiction recovery programs. And we demand public infrastructure projects and sustainable, community-based, and controlled economic initiatives for the poor. We also demand the end of the rolling back of fair housing protections at HUD. Those were the very protections that we passed at the death of Dr. King. That's the only reason they got passed. And we demand a repeal of the 2017 corporate welfare federal tax law, and we demand that not only do we challenge how it will hurt the poor, but that we label that as a form of racism, because we have not seen that level of money taken from the backs of working people since slavery took the amount of money it did from the backs of slaves. That's where you got to go back to see a $2 trillion cut. We demand that our nation and our lawmakers turn their immediate attention to passing policies and budget allegations that would end child poverty and would work with Mary Wright Edelman, who was originally with the Poor People's Campaign and the Children's Defense Fund. We demand 100% clean and renewable energy, public jobs program to transition to green economy that will put millions of people in sustainable living wage jobs. We demand fully funded public water and sanitation infrastructures. Why? Because Adrena Hawk is here. Where's Sister Hawk? From Flint, Michigan. Her son is the baby that's on the front page of Time magazine. She's in the Poor People's Campaign. His name is Sincere Smith. He was exposed to lead due to her inadequate water system. Come up and just sit beside us. You all can ask them questions if you so desire. But we also know we can't fix this and fracking and mountaintop removal, coal mining and coal ash ponds and protection of public lands. We can't do that unless we deal with our war economy and militarism. So we demand an end to military aggression and warmongering. We demand a stop to the privatization of military budget and any increase in military spending. We spend now over $600 billion in war. That's 2 times more than we spent during the days of Vietnam. And the CEOs of weapons manufacturers make an average of $19 million a year, while a combat soldier doesn't make $30,000 a year. And that's why Chris is here to talk. We demand a ban on assault weapons and the easy access to firearms that has led to the militarization and weaponization of our communities. We demand the demilitarization of our communities on the border and the interior. We demand a cease to the building of a wall, and we demand an immigration system that, instead of criminalizing people for trying to raise their family and prioritizing family reunification, tears families apart. And that's why my sister, where is she, who's here from California? There she is. Hadrina? Kenya. She's here from California, and she'd be glad to take any questions you have. My brothers and sisters, as I close, our commitment is deep. We need a moral budget. We're writing one. We're going to come back after the summer that focuses on how do we help the poor and the least of these. That should be the focus of government, because if you lift from the bottom, everybody gets lifted. Our commitment is as sincere as Dr. King when he said in '68, there are 2 Americas. One is beautiful, full of milk and honey, but the other America is ugly, and people die and starve every day. Not 40 million, but 140 million people. 43.5% of our population are poor and low wealth. Now, for courage's sake, let me close by saying people are going to call you everything. They'll call you socialist, communist. They'll call you one of those way off leftists. But 80 years ago, extremists dismissed many of the things now that we assume. They called it socialism. Compulsory insurance against unemployment. They call that socialism. Employment agencies being free to the public. They call that socialism. Old age pension for men and women 60 years old. They used to call that socialism. Abolition of child labor, aid to farmers and homeowners against foreclosure. Everything we believe in today, 100 years ago, was seen as impossible. But these policy proposals that were seen as impossible became a part of the deal of the 1930s because of the bonus marches, the social gospel movement, the black labor movement, the NAACP. They pushed FDR to a New Deal, and it in some ways saved the heart and soul of the nation, even though it didn't help everybody, because black folk didn't get written in Social Security until 1954, because the agrarian culture and the domestic culture was kept out. We believe we need a movement to push Republicans and Democrats to come together. It's not going to happen within, it's going to happen without, but it's got to be affected by those of you that have a conscience. We know what the Bible says. Isaiah 10 says, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights. Amos 5 says it is the responsibility of hurting people to fill up the streets and empty the factories and cry until justice rolls down like water. Jeremiah 22 says you've got to go down to the palace and tell the powerful to stop hurting the poor and the weak. Luke 4 says that the agenda of God is first the poor. Now, whatever you claim about being a person of faith, it is terribly suspect unless you are preaching good news to the poor, the patokos, those who've been made poor by economic exploitation. And Jesus said there's some policy questions, not charity questions, that Representative Lee, she knows these are policy questions that every nation is going to have to answer. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? When I was sick, did you care for me? And if that's socialism, then Jesus was a socialist. The fact of the matter is not. It's common sense. It's right. It's the moral thing to do. We are also launching this movement, and this is it, because we believe what our Constitution says. Taking health care from people is not the establishment of justice. Not allowing people to have a living wage does not promote domestic tranquility. Destroying people's lives does not promote the general welfare. So a lot of things that people are doing, they swore to uphold the Constitution, but evidently somebody was lying. And so let me close with a hymn of our nation so you can hear from these great people over the next hour. America the Beautiful. If we are truly going to be a just nation, we got to sing that second verse. A lot of people get stuck on that first verse. America the beautiful, oh, beautiful for gracious sky. But that second verse, it says, oh, beautiful for pilgrims' feet, whose stern, impassioned stress a thoroughfare of freedom beat across the wilderness. America, America, God mend thy every flaw. We have to mend the flaw of poverty. We have to mend the flaw of, even with the Affordable Care Act, 37 million people not having health care. We have to mend the flaw of 13 million children being in poverty and 4 million families not even have lead in their water. They can buy unleaded gas and can't buy unleaded water. We have to mend every flaw. That's the only way we're going to be one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And the Poor People's Campaign is committed. Our mantra is, before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail. Before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail. Somebody's hurting my brother, somebody's hurting our sisters, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore. That is my opening remarks for today. Let me call on these dear people who are so much more powerful as they come at this time. And I want to start with my sister, Amy Jo Hutchinson, and then Pamela Sue Rush will follow her, and then Christopher Olive, and then my dear sister here, Vanessa Nosey, and then Brother Nick Smith will speak, and then we will take questions. All of them are prepared who came around to answer your questions. Thank you so much. Amy?
Hi, thank you for this today. My name is Amy Jo Hutchison, and I come from West Virginia. I'm identify as being the working poor, but I also spent my life organizing around low-income moms in the state of West Virginia for a grassroots organization whose mission and commitment is to end child poverty. I think as I look back on my life, I'm 46 years old, and I've never spent a day in my life without poverty on some level. And I think it's really easy for us as human beings to punish people or dismiss people because we don't love them, and we can't love them, we say, if we don't know them. So I want to take a little bit of time today to bring some West Virginians in the room with me. I want to talk about our governor, who is the richest man in the state of West Virginia, who recently signed a bill into law to put these work requirements on SNAP recipients, although DHHR had their own study released that said work requirements does not increase employment. And then he turns around and he takes millions of dollars from our state Medicaid fund that he considered to be excess to pay for our teachers' wages. You may have heard of the West Virginia work stoppage with the teachers that took place over the spring. So today I want to turn your attention to Ashley, who is 21 years old, and she has autism. But Ashley is so high-functioning autistic that Social Security says that she doesn't qualify for disability. But yet Ashley's not able to work because her mania it prevents her from being in large crowds, loud spaces. She's tried several times and she hasn't been able to keep a job because of her disability with autism. And so Ashley is one of those able-bodied adults without dependents that's facing losing her SNAP benefits if this farm bill gets passed. I want to talk to you about Frank, who was a Vietnam veteran who sat and told stories to me about elderly people eating cat food to survive. I want to talk to you about Megan, the single mom who told me, I've sold my blood to feed my kids. I want you to think about Donna, who runs a food pantry in a rural county in the middle of West Virginia, and her neighbor lady has no one, so she went to the emergency room one night and she said, my neighbor lady coded, she was dead on the table, and the nurse came out and got me and said, Donna, she wants to speak to you. And she said, I just know this woman because she comes to my pantry and she gets a box of food. She said, when I walked into that room, she said, Donna, I don't think I'm going to make it to the pantry tomorrow. Do you think someone could bring my food box to my house? And she said that woman was dead on the table. And the first thing she thought about when she came back to life was the fact that she might miss the pantry the next day. I want you to think about my own children. I have 2 daughters, and they travel to food pantries with me, and they help me to organize and collect stories. And even my children at the ages of 11 and 14 know enough to know that if you don't eat, you die. I talked to a junior in high school this year in rural county, and she was telling me that there have been 3 suicides in her high school within this year and over 140 fistfights. And I said, why? And she said, everyone's angry. I said, why are they angry? And she said, you can't be poor and you can't be happy at the same time. And I don't know about you, but in my experience living in West Virginia, that young lady that's a junior in high school just described the opioid crisis in 10 words. So I want you to tell me, I had Medicaid, and so without any notice, DHHR sent me a letter. They told me I'd forgotten to send a form in February. So this is April when I get the letter. And by the time I received the letter, I had just a couple of days' notice that I no longer have health insurance. So please tell me, as a poor person, what I'm supposed to do. I have a bachelor's degree. I'm trying to heal a medical condition now with essential oils and prayers. While I work full time, I take my kids to the softball games. I'm doing everything that I can. I'm organizing around other poor people, predominantly low-income moms. And so I just don't think that we should have to give this much of ourselves in order to have a good quality of life in America, the richest country in the world. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much, Amy. And if you all would join in a little thing with us today, because it's hard for us to clap sometimes, so what we say is forward together. Not one. And that's our applause line to people, that they're not going to be alone. I got the clarification. She grew up in a Republican family. She'll tell you that if you ask. I knew I was a little bit right. And also Dominique Blake, who's a McDonald's worker, Fight for 15. And my dear sister I met this morning, who is disabled, who's handicapped, who's working every day, and the company in Maryland, and we need to tell the company, he knows about this, said that because she has a handicap, she doesn't deserve a union. And they're fighting her, called Dislake, is fighting her getting a union, Didlake. And I'm here, met her today, Samantha, right? Yes. Samantha. Pamela, would you share your story from Alabama?
Hi, my name is Pamela Roach. I'm from Lowndes County, Alabama. And I live in a mobile home with my 2 kids.
Sorry.
They charged me over $114,000 on a mobile home. They're falling apart. And then all animals coming in my house. Possum. I trap 4 possum in my house, cats and stuff. And I got raw sewage. I don't have no money on paw. And I have to travel back and forth to Birmingham to take my daughter with the CPAP machine. Don't have a car and don't have no way to take her. And then we have a high utility bill. And I was paying like $370 a month on the trailer. And I have like $270-something a light bill and $300-something like in the summertime. And the trailer don't hold no air and stuff in it, so it just, the power bill just, the light, where have the unit at, it just wrong. It don't cut off during the daytime. And it's hard. I couldn't buy my children stuff for what they need.
Pamela let us come in her house courageously. It was hard. She said, I want the nation maybe to help somebody else. A predatory lender raped her, literally, and made her pay $120,000 for a single white house that she's still paying for. Mold is on the wall. That's why her daughter has CPAP machine at 10 years old.
Mold and mildew and stuff in the house.
Yep. And she can't get out of the loan because of the predatory lender. She's in the Poor People's Campaign. She said, I have no place else to go but fighting. Her daughter's in the room, I believe.
Yes,
she's
she
10
is.
years old, and she is on a CPAP machine, pre-existing condition, because of the mold that's in this trailer that she can't get out of because of predatory lending in Alabama. Christopher, is it right? Yes, sir.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Give your mama a hug.
My name is Christopher Olive. I currently live in Grays Harbor County, which is in Washington State. I am 33 years old and a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. I received an honorable medical discharge in 2007 after 4 years of service due to complications from pancreatitis, which the VA ultimately determined to be a service-connected condition. Upon my discharge, I knew essentially nothing about the science of addiction and how it works in and ultimately changes the brain. I quickly went from taking my opiate-based pain management meds as prescribed to first slowly overusing them and then moving on to taking as many as I could handle, while at the same time watching everything I thought to be of value in my life slowly slip away. Not just material possessions, but really valuable things like relationships with friends and loved ones alike, and my own morals and values. This led to a 10-year period of drug addiction and periodic homelessness, of which the majority I was homeless. I came here today because I saw this as an amazing opportunity to shed some light on the overall lack of education and understanding of most mental and behavioral health issues. From drug addiction to misdiagnosed mental illness, there seems to also be a lack of compassion and humility, or at very least a turning of a blind eye to problem areas in our society. Allowing this to happen has paved the way for things like city ordinances where I live that ban the act of sitting on a sidewalk, which will result in a fine. I believe this type of legislation to be nothing more than a poorly veiled attempt to criminalize homelessness. There is little to no access to treatment facilities, transitional housing, or even affordable housing in Grays Harbor County. This is not because the Great Rivers Behavioral Health Organization that serves Grays Harbor County cannot afford it to expand the treatment services and housing, but due to the fact that they are sitting on $50 million in taxpayer dollars. Their official statement is that they are saving the money for a proposed future administrative building because the powers that be would rather spend that money on the formation of a behavioral health administration in roughly 2 years' time. If this $50 million were spent between the 5 counties in Washington State that Great River serves, that would be $10 million per county, and I can only begin to imagine the lives that might have been saved or could be saved if this money were being used for things that it is already authorized to be used for. An inpatient treatment facility, a community center, affordable housing, and rental assistance, to name a few. Thank you for your time.
Grays Harbor is in Aberdeen. There's forward together. There's 1,000 homeless people in a 16,000 seat county, a city, Aberdeen, and most of them are white and millennial, and we've been there. And also members of the indigenous community that are there, former Marines, people who fought in our wars. They fly the flag. We went there. They would say, "Why are you flying the flag?" She said, "We hope that people will look under the flag and see what's going on underneath." Miss Nosey.
Dagodeshi Vanessa Nosey Gonze, she Chiricahua Ine. Thank you. My name is Vanessa Nosey. I'm a Chiricahua Apache. I'm enrolled in the St. Carlos Apache tribe. I'm from the Apache Stronghold, which is protecting Oak Flat from Resolution Copper. Today, I stand here united with the Poor People's Campaign and standing here with my brothers and sisters as we are trying to fight what we're all fighting for is justice. The Apache Stronghold has started a caravan that it started in Northern California and is going to be here on June 23rd for the action here with the Poor People's Campaign. Before I tell you a little bit about my own people, I want to tell you about the journey that we started. We started in a Lem Pomo Indian colony, which when you enter the reservation, before you enter the reservation, it says hazardous area. Enter at your own risk by the county lake of Clear Lake, California. They've been mining mercury since 1957 and have left it open with heavy metal leaking into the water and the land. They stopped fishing in the 1970s and have a high rate of cancer in the community. I worry because I have family, not only just my family there, but the indigenous people in the surrounding communities that are being affected. We talk about healthcare. We talk about worrying about the environment, but yet when they're allowing open pit mines and letting it leak into the land, into the water, The high rate of cancer and the high bills of health is going to continue to raise because of corporations and greeds and politicians that don't want to listen. We went to Oakland, California, to Berkeley, and they met with the Ohlone tribe there. They went to the shell mound. There's 425 shell mounds. One of them that they went to was a parking lot. They're trying to stop more construction of homes and shopping centers on these sacred sites that their ancestral has direct connection to. There's nothing in this place and in those places and no laws or treaties that protect the indigenous people there, the Ohlone and other tribes in California. So they're hurting because when they look at their holy mountains and the holy sites, they're covered with asphalts and buildings. How are they going to connect themselves? They have to try really hard spiritually to ground themselves through those concretes to reach their holy people. In LA, they stopped in LA, and this is the most famous urban public place for indigenous people. In 1974, the most population of relocated indigenous people known as Indian Alley, the United American Indian involvement, a space is a perfect example of systematic racism and poverty. They are ripped from their homelands. Over 100 tribes living in LA. This is still an ongoing of how homeless impacts indigenous people. They hurt for their sacred sites because it is concrete. The stronghold sweat in La Jolla with the Los Yosin Indian band and blessings at the river and water of essential part of cultures of indigenous people. Our caravan is going to come throughout the country. I stand here representing not only my Ine, my Apache people, but all indigenous people, because when we talk about environmental impacts, we talk about systematic racism, we talk about militarism. Right now, the stronghold is in Sales, Arizona, which they are touring the border of where the immigration, where Trump wants to build a wall, and that's going to directly impact the Tohono people and the Paskuyaki people, because that is their ancestral homeland. That's where they conduct ceremonies. And so that is going to be deeply affected to them. So today, as I stand here before you, before Congress, before Senate, I'm asking you to hear us all. I'm asking you to hear our cries, because what indigenous people are doing, what we are fighting for, the land, the water is for everybody in this world. How are we going to be able to turn on your water faucets? How are you going to be able to feed your children? How are you going to be able to walk outside and breathe clean air? Because as indigenous people, we have been fighting colonizations over 500 years. Our fight still exists. We are still considered as prisoners of war. As I protect Oak Flat, which has been given to a foreign mining company called Resolution Copper, owned by Rio Tinto, how I'm going to continue to take my children to pray and to pick their medicines and the food and to bathe in the water. That is who I am as an Apache woman. How am I going to continue on my tradition and my culture if I can only tell stories and my kids and my grandkids and my great-grandkids cannot see the places that I'm talking about? So I thank you. I thank you for listening to us and hearing our stories, because what impacts us impacts all you, no matter if you're rich or poor, if you have a home or if you don't. So thank you. Here.
Forward together.
Now one step back.
And that is a form of racism, because the policy that allowed this multinational company to do what they're doing to their land was done right here in the Senate, was right here in the Capitol. We're fighting. You may ask, what do we want? We want a change in language. We're fighting for folk to talk about these issues as moral issues, to lift up these 5 areas together: systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, war economy, militarism, and the false moral narrative of so-called Christian nationalism. We want to see legislation that we can fight for, and we want to lift the poor. No more hearings when you have issues that do not have poor people talking in those hearings, impacted people. Not another season of debates when people are running for office and the only people asking the question are talking heads from TV. We need impacted people asking the questions, so that when politicians look at them, they're having to talk to the face of the reality of what's being asked. Nick is from Appalachia.
Testing. My name is Nick Smith. I'm from southwestern Virginia in the coal fields of central Appalachia. I'm the son of a coal miner's daughter. So that's 2 generations of not having access to the good union jobs, I guess is the way to put it. The history of my region, at least, for the past 150 years, has been shaped by the coal companies, these out-of-state companies who have bought up the land and who have over-specialized the economy, so the economic diversity is lost. They've created dependency, and as the coal jobs have disappeared, nothing's really come in its place, and it's created chronic poverty. Poverty's a generational thing. If you grow up poor, your upward mobility to become not poor is stunted. And I don't even live in the coal fields anymore, and I still feel that. The thing is, even as the coal jobs leave, the impact of the coal companies does not. I grew up around mountaintop removal sites, natural gas, hydraulic fracturing. The water that ran into our house that we bathed in, we couldn't drink. We couldn't drink the water we bathed in. It seems like every year or so, a relative of mine is dying from cancer because of this ecological devastation, and I can't get off work to go to the funerals. That happened just a couple weeks ago, and it's going to keep happening. It's going to keep happening, and the options we're left with if we want to get out of poverty is to either go into debt, go in the military, which many people are not fit to do physically. They're disqualified. That's 75% of military-age U.S. adults can't enlist. And, we're left with really nothing there. And when we try to fight, when us poor, low-wage workers such as myself try to organize together, our abilities taken from us because of anti-union legislation such as right to work. I've worked union jobs, I've worked non-union jobs, and I see the difference. The instability in scheduling, the arbitrary, punitive things that happen to workers who just upset their boss one day, really haven't done anything. I mean, in the state of Virginia, you could be let go for no reason at all. And, I'm here because my papaw, he was a union coal miner. He was there at the Pittston coal strike in 1989 when the company decided to cut the health care benefits for retired miners. My parents were in high school during the Pittston coal strike of '89, and they were part of the UMWA student auxiliary and had walked out trying to support it. That sort of sense of community around the union and labor doesn't exist in Appalachia anymore. It's just about gone.
Nick,
that's all.
Share with them real quickly what you told us last week about the voting piece and how because you taught me how people in Appalachia understand the connection between systemic racist voter suppression and your experience.
Well, one thing I got to say on the matter of voter suppression is it impacts rural communities as well as urban communities. But the thing is, what prevents us really on a community-wide level and as on a national level from fighting these poverty issues, many of the poor people are divided by race. We're intentionally segregated. And voter suppression laws are pushed, and what we find is that we're even powerless to come together to address the issues even, and it hurts poor whites as well as poor black and brown folks. It's an across-the-board thing. As long as we're divided, they can conquer,
And we've been having this conversation that this is the racism we want to be talked about. The words, we want to talk about policy, systemic racism that has to be challenged. As we conclude, Dominique is here. She's a fast food worker. And my dear sister, Kenya, they have a quick comment. And then the others are here. You can ask them questions. But I know Brother Sturgill, I know Sister Margie, my sister. They're here to sit with them. I want them to be able to answer any question. But Dominique, you had a quick word you wanted.
Hello, my name is Kenya Alcocer, and I'm undocumented. And in 2009, when I started working with immigrant youth groups, we were all shouting out of the lungs, we're out of the shadows, we're undocumented and unafraid. Unfortunately, today, most immigrants are afraid. But we're not just afraid of getting deported, we're now afraid of having our children ripped from our arms while we're crossing borders. And the fear, it's not just as an immigrant with deportations, the fear is displacement. I come from Los Angeles where rents are going up every time. We used to rent a one-bedroom apartment with $800. Now it's up to $2,000. Minimum wages aren't going up. Public housing, it's getting attacked on a daily basis, whether it's through privatization or now what they're trying to do, which is a 20% rent increase. All of these policies that are coming, not just from this capital, but from our state capitals, are affecting our communities. And what we're seeing is, and at least speaking for myself and for the community that I work with, a piece of paper is not going to solve the issues that happen in my community on an everyday basis. That piece of paper, it's not going to take away the contamination that we're getting from companies like Exide that are polluting our community's water with arsenic and lead. A piece of paper, it's not going to change the conditions in my home country and other home countries where there's a war economy going with policies of free trade agreements that are affecting those communities and pushing them to come here. Those things are happening on an everyday basis. This country militarizes our communities as well with guns and tanks that are going through our streets and are killing U.S. citizens. Not just undocumented folks, but also U.S. citizens. We are seeing this on an everyday basis. And this is the reason why our undocumented community is here saying that we're joining the Poor People's Campaign, because this is not about a paper, this is not about citizenship, this is about human rights. Basic human rights. We all have the right to live. And we are fighting because this is my child right here, Jimena. Come on, mamas, get up here. And I want her to grow up in a society where she's able to meet her grandfather who's in Mexico. I want her to grow in a society where she's able to get access to higher education without getting herself in debt. I want her to be able to breathe good quality air. We get the notices from Google, don't go out tonight, or don't go out today, or limit your exercise today because your air quality is bad in Los Angeles. I want her to have clean water, something that in a lot of the communities we don't have. Central Valley in California, people can't drink water, and those are the folks that are working to feed America. I want to be able to say that this campaign and you, alongside with us, were able to change the direction that this nation is going towards. And I want to be able to look at my daughter in the face and say, we did this because of you, and we've continued to change because our children need this change. Thank you.
Forward together.
Not one step back.
And so you're hearing Senator Warren and Cummings and all others. These are the voices from this campaign, this launch. We understand it's going to be work. We're committed to multi-year, but we aren't going back, not one step back. And folk here are seriously committed to mass, nonviolent, moral, civil disobedience, massive voter mobilization, building power among the poor. We've got other documents coming out. I hope that you may ask Brother Sturgill, Sister Margie, Sister Kenya, not Kenya, excuse me. I keep saying Ariana, if they would have a word. I don't want to, and Callie, who's here, whose daughter literally died because Alabama refused to expand Medicaid. And actually hurt more white people than they did black. And she's out here now saying, my daughter is not going to die in vain, and she's bringing all different kinds of people into this movement. So I hope you all, if you have time, would ask them. They may want to say a minute or two. I love the coal mine and Margie and them just to say something, but I just wanted to recognize them because I knew we had a time frame. But I'll let you, if you want to ask them questions, to do so.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend Barber, and thank you very much for bringing the Poor People's Campaign here to Washington. We need to hear from you, and I'm grateful that you're here. And thank you all for telling your stories, for giving voice to millions of people that you represent. You offer a vivid testimony of pain and of determination and deeply moving statements about the impact of poverty. I am also grateful to my colleagues who have come here today to listen to your testimony. It is important that they're here. Congressman Cummings and I ordinarily at this point would start the questioning, but in the interest of time, we're going to yield and let our colleagues have a chance to go first. I'm just going to ask everybody to hold it to 5 minutes so that we'll be able to hear from everyone who's here. And if we can, we'll start with Congresswoman Lee.
Thank you very much. Let me thank you, Senator Warren and Congressman Cummings, for putting this very important forum together on poverty and Poor People's Campaign. And to all of my House and Senate colleagues, I want to just thank you all for your consistent work each and every day to really make the American dream real for everyone, and I mean everyone. And to Reverend Barber, thank you for leading the charge for a national call for a moral revival, because your moral clarity is so important in this day and time. And our panelists, I just have to say to you, thank you for your bravery, your courage, being here to share your real life experience. It's so important because your lives and listening to your stories, they're the clarion calls for justice and for morality. Now, I chair the Democratic WHIP Task Force on Poverty, Inequality, and Opportunity. We have over 100 members in the House on this task force. We established this task force because a few of us said, look, we have got to start talking about not only the middle class, but people who live below the poverty line, the poor. So we have, like I say, over 100 members on this task force, and Steny Hoyer, our whip, we're conducting now throughout the nation poverty listening tours. We went to Dallas last week. We'll be going to Milwaukee pretty soon. And it's so important because we have to underscore how important it is to eradicate poverty, which includes robust funding for job training, raising the minimum wage, all of the issues and policies that you laid out, Reverend Barber. But also, we shouldn't have one person living below the poverty line in the wealthiest country in the world. And now we're looking at possible SNAP benefits in this hateful farm bill, passing an executive order on poverty, which is the goal is to push more people over the edge and into poverty. And so we know that our anti-poverty programs have worked. Since President Johnson's war on poverty in 1964, we began to reduce poverty, but we abandoned our commitment to the poor. And so I just want to say to you that we've got to do more, and your voices, your work will help us begin to close this gap as it relates to economic and racial inequality. Because these are moral issues which are issues that unify us. And I'm reminded of, again, Dr. King's speech, April 1967. He said the three evils are racism, poverty, and militarism. Well, we still have to conquer those three evils. And I think with this fusion movement, I'm optimistic that we can do that. Reverend Barber, you laid out the goals and agenda. I don't know why we just can't accept that as what we need to do in terms of our work here in Congress, from our various committees, from our caucuses, and I sure am going to take back to the House this agenda and have more discussions through our task force. So I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your voices. Thank you for your courage. And just ask one question about raising the minimum wage, because we know now, yes, we need to raise the minimum wage, but we need a living wage, because now with the cost of housing, the cost of health care, the cost of transportation, what do you think that would do for your families if, in fact, we talked about not only raising the minimum wage, but moving to a living wage so people can truly truly live the American dream, which everyone deserves in the wealthiest country in the world.
Brother Sturgis, you want to take that question? I'll give you this mic. Let the coal miner have something to say.
Well, according to what you ask, right now there's a move on, especially in Kentucky, with this new right-to-work law. Now, it's gotten rid of every United Mine Worker Union in the state of Kentucky. There's none anymore in the state of Kentucky. I've been a union member since 1968. I have black lung. I worked 41 years in the coal mines. But to get back to your question, when you introduce laws like that, you're not looking at increasing minimum wage. You're looking at going backwards. We have an administration right now in place that is doing everything they can to set us back as much as they can. The war on poverty supposedly started 50-some years ago. We got an old saying in the coal mines, it's rough at the face. Well, where I live in southeastern Kentucky, it's rough at the face because the poverty in that area hasn't gotten better. It's worse today than it's ever been. And it's not looking any promising at all until something is done. And I feel so blessed to be here today to bring my message, what I can say, to represent the people from where I live, especially the coal miners that are suffering with this black lung. And I feel so blessed that I just got to come up here and try to get to talk to you guys. The last time I was here, I was in my 5th District Congressman's office, Mr. Hal Rogers. And I wanted to talk to him about coal mine safety. I wanted to talk to him about the health of the coal miners, black lung. He didn't want to talk. So he had me arrested right there in his office. Gosh. There was a whole group of us, and all we were doing was singing Amazing Grace. And they just didn't like that, evidently. But anyhow, he had us carted off to jail. I won't go into all that. I spent all day in jail, though, and had to come back 2 or 3 different trips. But my message is, if we don't straighten some of these issues out, especially the pensions for the United Mine Workers, that's on the table right now. My Senator Mitch McConnell says, oh, we got plenty of time. We'll take care of that. You know, things seem to disappear in plenty of time. They forget. We need to take care of that. We need to light a fire under them and get them on the ball and get to taking care of some of these things. This deal to take care of the black lung benefits, it's already been appropriated. It's in the abandoned mines land deal. Well, you know, why can't we get on the ball and make sure that I've got medicine to take, and I've got neighbors that live right around me? I'm blessed. I'm in better shape than some of my neighbors. And I know they're hurting. And then I've got my neighbors that can't get their black lung. And they've worked their lives in the coal mines. It took me 7 years going to see doctor after doctor after doctor to get a settlement on my black lung. And I finally got it. And I thank the good Lord for that. But I'll hush. I mean, you know, I just wanted to get my message to you.
That's right.
Thank you very much. This is about restructuring society, my colleagues. That's what this is about, so thank you.
And we are pushing
Thank you,
15 and a union
you.
and even more than that. And we're going to put a policy out about guaranteed income, basic, because Dr. King said if you don't deal with income and health, you really haven't dealt with the issues of poverty.
Okay.
Let me let
Thank
a couple
you.
of those get on.
So I'm going to go to our next one so that we're going to try to stick to 5 minutes here for each one. And if I can, I'm going to ask Congressman Khanna if you'd speak, please.
Thank you, Senator Warren, Representative Cummings, for your moral leadership in having this hearing. I have to tell you, finishing my first term in Congress, and I've now been to a lot of committee hearings, but I've never been as moved, not as a politician, just as a human being, hearing your testimony and your statements. I was most struck by your statement that you won't let this campaign fail and would go to jail before you let it fail. And I was able to look up something, Reverend Barber, you said that really struck me. You said, I would rather die trying to change the moral direction of this nation than to live and die and it be written on my epitaph, lived in the time when moral dissent was necessary, and he and they said nothing. I would rather die than to say nothing. And that's in the extraordinary tradition of people like Nelson Mandela and Dr. King. It reminded me of my own grandfather, whose life was far greater than mine would ever be. He spent 4 years in jail during Gandhi's independence movement. And I remember him telling a story of how Indians during the colonial rule were marching and they would get beaten by British soldiers, and a new row of activists would go knowing they were going to get beaten. That type of moral courage is the only thing I believe that has ever changed our nation or world for the better, and it's really humbling to see that kind of courage with all of you. I guess my question is on the militarism aspect that Congresswoman Lee and so many have spoken out against. We have spent trillions of dollars on these wars, and what would all of you say to that military spending and that money that could have gone for so many of these causes to help our nation and ordinary people?
Well, Nick, we've had some Christians and others that talk. On our policy, we say we cannot continue 15 cents for education and health care and infrastructure and 53 cents of every discretionary dollar going into war and militarism, and if Trump would have his way, up to 60-some%. Dr. King said any nation that spends like that in military is only wishing for death. It's like a death wish. It is so off, and it's not that we have to choose either or. I think we've had some scientists that are working with us, and they say that they can't even conclude whether we can blow the world up 5 times or 50 times. Well, once is pretty much enough. And the point we're saying is we get this false narrative. It's between protection and not protect. Well, what would protect our people more than to have a real war on poverty, to have the sick lifted and the poor lifted as well? There's a real war I want to tell you, and I want Callie to tell you about a real war, the battles that she's fighting.
Good evening. My name is Callie Greer. I'm from Selma, Alabama. My daughter name is Venus. So you let them look at my baby. Let them look at it. Give it to them. Let them get a close-up look. So that was Venus. She found a little lump in her breast, and so she wasn't employed and didn't have any health insurance, so she started using the emergency room, is what we do. And so they just kept turning her in and out of the emergency room, telling her, you know, maybe something you bathe in or whatever, just giving her medicine. So she went once, and when the doctor walked in the room, he's like, "What's that smell?" And she's like, "It's my breast. It's rotting." So then they sent her to the cancer center, and she was in the 4th stage of breast cancer. She had a radical mastectomy, chemo, and radiation. She was in remission for about 4 months, and then when she went back, the cancer had spread through her whole body. She had spots on her lungs, on her liver, on her bones. Every piece of equipment that Venus had to have, she had to wait to be approved for it, even though she had 4th stage cancer and had half her chest cut off. So she she was waiting at the latter part of her life. Venus was waiting to be to qualify for breathing equipment and for casket. So she came to the house one Saturday. One Saturday she said, "Mom, my head hurts so bad I can hardly see." So we took her to the cancer center and they rushed her to the emergency room. And Venus lapsed into a coma. And thank you. So she got the CAT scan then, and she had 2 tumors on her head, and one had ruptured, and she was brain dead. And so they put on the machine and everything, and we left that night and went and prayed, and came back and said if she doesn't breathe on her own, we was going to let her go, and so we unplugged the machines. She was gone. So, you know, I tell Venus story all the time, but I never stop crying because I have to take myself out of myself. So I see this woman sitting there crying, and I identify with her because nobody else should have to bury their baby like that because she didn't have insurance. So, you know, I don't waste my pain. I fight for other people's children because Venus is already gone.
That's right.
So I do not waste my pain. And I will not be quiet, and I will tell her story wherever I go because this is not right.
That's right.
Venus is supposed to be alive.
That's right.
Venus had a little lump in her breast, a little lump. Venus is supposed to be here with us.
And Congressman, the reason I would take that question and give it to her, because we don't separate the overfunding of war and the underfunding of health care. See, that's what we're saying. That we're not going to be separated. We're saying there are 5 interlocking injustices. You can't deal with poverty and health care if you don't deal with the war economy and militarism. So it's directly connected.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Congressman Khanna. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for being here. One of my biggest frustrations in my adult life has been how we in this nation seem to render so many people invisible, who really represent the majority of our country, who are struggling. I made a decision back in my 20s that I would move into a community, a low-income community. I live in a neighborhood where the median income is $14,000 per household, where I've lived for the last about 20, 25 years. And I get angry on a regular basis that my community experiences things that most people don't realize goes on a daily basis. And that there's a sense of a lack of urgency about a lot of the issues that we're struggling with and dealing with. I spent about a decade of that time living in some high-rise public housing projects and saw senior citizens have to struggle for years and years and years with roach and mice infestations, elevators that don't work, that strand people in lobbies. I've seen the challenges, people who work full-time jobs, who still have to rely on food stamps, who still have to rely on public housing, who still have to rely on public assistance, but yet work as hard, if not harder, than my parents did. One of the biggest challenges that I see is that people don't understand the intersectionality of all of these issues and all these folks. And they benefit from separating folks in urban communities like mine from folks in rural communities, from folks that are living poor across our country. And I think that weakens the movement. But another issue that weakens the movement for me is that we are failing to see how economic issues are tied to environmental issues or are tied to issues of racism, which are tied to issues of the challenges we're having with the criminal justice system run out of control. And I know from living in a community where we have shrines up to children on our street corners, what one shooting can do. A friend of mine, Natasha, who works at IHOP, makes $2.13 an hour plus tips. She couldn't leave her job to go across the street where her son had asthma. In my community, asthma rates are 3-4 times higher than communities of privilege. On top of that, one shooting in front of that IHOP meant the IHOP had to cut a shift, which meant she couldn't catch extra shifts to try to help her family meet ends meet. And I see that these issues are so interwoven. There's a study that came out, I think Vanderbilt University, said we'd have about 20% less poverty in America if we had incarceration rates the same as our industrial peers. I've challenged cameras to come into my community and just ask every African-American male we stop, had they ever been arrested? And often they're arrested for doing things that 2 of the last 3 presidents admitted to doing. And so the questions I want to say is, two questions is, first and foremost, you know, as a guy who lives in a community where my kids drink out of bottled water because there's a contamination in the water, where the soil is contaminated, where you can't plant tomato gardens in your backyard, where the air is contaminated, where we have Superfund sites which in our neighborhoods which cause high rates of birth defects and autism. And I've been down to Pamela, to your county, and seen the raw sewage running through. I've been to Duplin County to see what the CAFOs are doing there. I've been to Cancer Alley in Louisiana and see what's happening there. There's often a lack, when we talk about poverty, a lack of talking about environmental urgencies and the high rates of cancers, the high rates of respiratory diseases, the high rates of medical conditions that often disproportionately affect communities like mine, where you have infants being lost at birth, where you have children dying of cancer rates, as you see with African Americans, 10 times higher death rates from cancer. And I'm wondering, as a guy who's pushed forward an environmental justice bill at a time that everybody wants to talk about climate change, what could we be doing collectively to bring these issues out of the shadows, to help people understand that you cannot solve a lot of these other problems unless we're willing to have a candid conversation about the millions, tens of millions of Americans that live, like my community, in environmental disaster zones, often made from corporations who have left these legacies of toxic areas.
My name is Ariana Hawk, and I'm from Flint, Michigan. As many of you know, the water crisis in Flint, it made national news. That was 4 years ago. I stand before you here today because 4 years later, our kids are still suffering. We don't have clean water. Our government has turned their back on us, and we're left to just depend on each other. I can afford to pay the highest water bills in the nation, and on top of that, provide clean water for my kids. I didn't poison them. My government poisoned them. The people in my community, we are all suffering. We are all poor, not because of decisions that we chose to make, but decisions of our government. Our government let us down. You know, so this is like, it's a difficult thing to talk about because you can't imagine being in my footsteps. I have children who have never had the experience of drinking from the tap, using regular water. All they know is bottled water. All they know is not to go near the faucet, not to use that faucet. So it's just difficult. So.
Well, and the only thing I'll say, leave, is that I actually can understand where you're coming from. My community has higher blood lead levels in my children's blood than Flint, Michigan. And there's, according to Reuters, there's 1,000 jurisdictions in America with children with blood lead levels where Flint, Michigan is or higher. And we have a common pain in this country, but we've got to find a sense of common purpose.
So why do we let that go on? Why do we keep allowing these cities to keep popping up after Flint made national news? We steady allow these cities that are poor to still be left in the dirt and in the ground. Like we're literally begging for clean water. In your city, my city, other cities, we're begging for a necessity that we deserve to have. We shouldn't be begging for clean water. We shouldn't be asking our government to provide us with clean water when you poisoned our water.
Agreed. Amen. And if we speak with one common voice, that gives us much more power.
And the fact that Nestle now doesn't have to pay hardly anything to get water, $200 a year. But I pay that on a monthly basis. Right. And that's why our policy is we're demanding clean water, we're demanding infrastructure redone, and people will have to be prosecuted. If this was done in high wealth communities, people would already be in jail.
Yeah. Thank you, Senator Booker. Senator Sanders.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren and Representative Cummings. I think Representative Connor made a point a little while ago that this was perhaps the best hearing that he has been to since he's been in Congress. This morning, I was at a hearing with a representative of the Secretary of HHS, who's there to represent the drug companies and to continue a process by which we pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And this is an important hearing, because what you are all talking about, and you have to understand this, is not just 10 or 12 people here. You're talking for over 100 million Americans. And all across this country, what people are asking themselves, there's not much that I can add to what Cory or Elizabeth or anyone else has said here. What people are asking is, we are not a poor country. Right. We're the richest country in the history of the world. Today, there's a guy who happened to owns Amazon. His wealth increased today by $275 million. And it increased yesterday by $275 million. And a few months ago, the Congress voted to give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the wealthiest 1%. And Congress is right now voting on expanding military spending by $716 billion in 1 year. Right. We have 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. So you are speaking for people all across this country. You are speaking for people who are dying who are seeing their family members die. Because why? Because we are the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. All right? Do you think many people in America understand that this wealthy nation, the only one, your daughter would not be dead today if she lived in any other major country on earth? Now, you ask, where was the woman from Michigan, from Flint? All right? I went to Flint. And I will never forget the meeting that I attended. It was a quiet meeting, no media there. And I heard a mother talking about the brain damage that her baby, her little girl, suffered. All right? I don't know how families deal with that. And we're talking about the water crisis all across this country, in the richest country in the history of the world. And you asked, how does it happen? All right? And let me say 2 things. I will tell you exactly how it happens, because most of the members here in Congress are not here to represent you all or the vast majority of the American people. They're here to represent billionaires who fund their campaigns. That's how it happens, all right? What is important, and I think the point that Reverend Barber is making, and all of you are making when we talk about a moral revival, is what you are doing, which is so important, so difficult, so painful, is you are speaking from your heart and with enormous courage talking about your lives. Now, you know, today I understand that I was told there could be 100,000 people in D.C. to talk about a hockey team that won the Stanley Cup. And that's great. Okay, I'm not much of a hockey fan, but I suppose that's okay. But we need hundreds of thousands of people all over this country, not to worry about some billionaire team that won a game, but to start talking about the reality of their lives. How you can't make it on $9 an hour and why we need to raise the minimum wage. How we can't have our kids drinking polluted water. So I just want to ask a question to all of you. Is you have shown incredible courage, not only being here today, by willing, you know, and I think Cory and Elizabeth made this point, all over this country, people in your condition are invisible. They're pushed under the rug. They are ignored. Reverend Barber talked about, I was, you know, in these things, poverty is not an issue. All right, well, poverty must be an issue. How do we get people, here's my question to any and everybody, how do we get people to have the courage that you have had to come out of the shadows and say, you know what, I'm working 50 hours a week, I'm working in the coal mines, I'm a retiree, I don't have a pension, and I can't make it, and it's wrong that in this country, I should be able to live in dignity. All of our people should be able to live in dignity. How do we get people to have the courage? Because when millions of people begin to stand up and talk about their lives, you know what? Change is going to come. They're going to vote. They're going to throw out people who represent the billionaires. Mm-hmm. So that's my question. How do we get people to have the courage that all of you guys have shown today?
My name is Margie Storch. I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'd like the people in the room who have performed civil disobedience and gone to jail as a result to raise their hand. You know, we are standing up and we are telling our stories, and we're going to continue to do that. It's very important that we talk to our neighbors, our families about these issues. We all must vote. And I want to share the story of my brother-in-law, who is no longer with us. I brought a picture of him right here with two of his nephews. He worked as a cook in a nursing home. He loved to cook. He loved to serve our elderly. He served mostly Medicaid patients, but he himself, although he was working, did not qualify for Medicaid. He did not qualify for the Affordable Care Act subsidies because he didn't make enough money, and he was too young to qualify for Medicare. So he was in a health care gap, and I'm sorry to say that once again, the North Carolina legislature failed to expand Medicaid. And I think we know in this country, with all of our riches, we can afford to provide health care for everyone. When we set up separate health programs like CHIP and Medicaid and Medicare and everything else, we divide people and we pit them against each other. Everyone needs health care. We can afford health care. We can spend less on health care and cover everyone. So we're here today asking for improved and expanded Medicare for all. And every other developed country in the world does this. You know, this is a matter of national security. We're spending way too much on weapons and not enough on health care for our families. And my brother-in-law, Jeff Moore, didn't deserve to die. He was serving people that had health care, and he had none for himself. So we will continue to tell those stories. And thank you very much for this opportunity. The people that are suffering from wrong-headed policies are the ones that have the solution. So I encourage you to ask other members of Congress when they have hearings to listen from the people affected by the problems. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, thank you all so much. How are we going to build it? All of us are going to be building it. The 23rd, we're having a massive call to action here in D.C., and we're not stopping. This is just the beginning.
If we can spend just a few minutes more. Senator Durbin.
Thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank Senator Warren, Congressman Cummings, and all my colleagues for calling us together. I've served in the House and in the Senate for over 30 years. There was a time when we had regular hearings and people like yourself coming to talk to us. It's now very rare that we actually hear from people across the United States about the struggles and challenges they have. So the fact that you would come today and we would set up this forum is refreshing to me. And it gives me some hope. I hope it gives you some as well. That there are people who are listening up here who are determined to make a difference. 19 months ago, there was an election. Remember? I think we all do remember. And it changed a lot in America. A lot of people opened their eyes and said, I didn't think anything like that could ever happen. And it did. And it changed this government pretty dramatically from the administration of Barack Obama to this administration. And we have seen changes in terms of this president's priorities. And sadly, they don't include almost anything that we talked about today. Decent wages, health care for everyone, decent housing. Just the opposite is true. But what's happening across America, I want to tell you, gives me some encouragement. And here's what it is. 40% of the American people today say, to your observation, 40% say that in the last year and a half, they have participated in a protest or a march that they've never done before in their lives. So many people are opening their eyes and realizing that the solution to the problem we face is personal. It's a matter of what we do about it and what can be done about it. That's why I want to make one point and then one issue. The point is this. A few years ago when I chaired a committee on the Judiciary Committee and went out to look at voter suppression I went to Ohio, and I went to Florida. Both of those states had just made it tougher to vote. ID cards, limited opportunity in advance to vote. And in each of those states, I convened election officials from both political parties, put them under oath, and said, what was the incidence of voter fraud that led you to make it more difficult to vote? And the answer was none. There was no incidence of voter fraud. What I heard in both of those states convinced me that what's at play here is not voter fraud. It is suppressing the vote of people just like those who've gathered here today. And I will tell you, we have one little roadmap that gives us hope. That roadmap is called the Constitution. And the Constitution not only gives us rights, but it gives us opportunities and responsibilities to vote. More than anything else, we need a massive registration effort across America of people who are not going to take no for an answer and are determined to show up to vote in 19 weeks when we have that chance. The last point I want to make to Kenya and your beautiful little girl, what is her name? Ivana? Boy, is she pretty. 17 years ago, I introduced the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act was put into consideration in the Senate to say that young, undocumented people who came here as babies and infants and toddlers and little children would have a chance to become legal in America, to become citizens in America. I've been struggling in this battle for a long time, and I'm sorry we're not any further than we are today. But I never dreamed, never ever dreamed that I would be up against a president like this. I never dreamed that I would have an experience like I did just yesterday in my office in Chicago, Illinois, where a woman came to see me. She's 40 years old, from the Democratic Republic of Congo. They threatened to kill her child, her baby, and she grabbed her baby and ran. Somehow she got to Brazil in South America, and somehow she got to Mexico on a bus, and somehow she presented herself at the border of the United States asking for asylum and protection for her and her daughter. And you know what they did? They took her daughter away. Took her daughter right out of her arms. And the reason I know it is they moved her daughter out of California to Chicago, 2,000 miles away. That's when I heard about this case. And then she went before a hearing. She was not given a lawyer. Her English, she was using a translator. Her English is very limited. And she gave up all of her rights to stay just to get her baby back. Just to get her baby back. That is what's happened in America. That is who we are. That is the official policy of this administration, to snatch these babies out of the arms of mothers. That is what they stand for. And so what I say to you is, I'm glad, Reverend Barber, that we're together here. Black, white, and brown, young and old, women and men, people who are documented, people who are not documented, and their children, because that's the only way we can survive and the only way we can prevail. So please, help me to help you by registering to vote. Give me some more senators and congressmen who would be here at this hearing and really care. That's how we make the change. Thank you.
Congressman Cummings.
Thank you all for being here today. And I want to thank you again, Senator Warren, and all my colleagues for being a part of this. You know, as I listen, Reverend Barber, I could not help, I'm always telling my office that I want to be effective and efficient. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be on this earth. I don't know how much longer I'm going to be in this job. But while I'm here, I want to be effective and efficient. And I'm going to ask you a question in a second, just it'll be very brief because I know we're running out of time. But what is the best way for us working with you to effectively and efficiently get to where we got to go? Now, just let me make these little two statements and I'm finished. To you and to many of the people who have spoken here, I have a concept that I truly believe in. And that is, so often out of our pain comes our passion to do our purpose. Out of our pain, out of the pain comes our passion to do our purpose. And as I listened to you talk, I could not help. I mean, the pain just etched in your soul that will not leave you And then to hear the mother who wants to make sure that her daughter is not snatched from her arms. I mean, we can go on in all the stories. And you, when you talked about your daughter in the mold-infested trailer with CPAP. Well, I use CPAP. And I can tell you, I mean, that's a tough situation when you cannot breathe. When you cannot breathe. And then to be burdened with all kinds of the bills that you have, that's rough. And so we are truly committed to working with you. The other comment that I wanted to make is, Reverend Barber, I am so glad that this movement is a diverse movement. You know, a lot of times when I talk to my constituents, I say to them, I wish I wasn't an elected official. Because all of a sudden, when I talk about things that are meaningful, they say, oh, he's just saying that because he's a Democrat or he's a progressive or whatever. It's about what is human and what is right. And so I rather like you take the labels off and go for the results to allow people to live the best lives that they can. And so I'll go back to my questions since I want to wrap it up. But please tell us how you think we can be most effective and efficient in accomplishing the things that you all have set out.
I'm probably going to say something that's going to be a little strange. And part of it is going to be that just having Trumpitis isn't enough.
I agree.
We got to understand that if Barack Obama had 4 more terms, we'd have still had 37 million people without health care and 140 million people if Hillary Clinton had been elected. It does not mean that his administration hasn't exacerbated. I'm not what I'm talking about. But we've got to look at the fact and own that we've had a 50-year push toward this. We have to own that Democrats and Republicans committed the sin of taking poverty out of the political discourse. And we got to the place where either folk were talking about middle class or military and not the poor. And we allowed folk to take the moral language and put it only on personal moral issues. And we did not continue to talk about civil rights and as moral issues. And I'm saying this even as a progressive. I'm an independent, but even we've struggled with that. So we've got, number one, to be effective and efficient. We got to change the language. The 140 million people that we're talking about voting that are poor and low wealth, if they never hear their condition, they not move to vote. They have to hear their names. They have to hear poverty. They have to hear it. They can't just hear middle class is going to fix it. Voting, we've got to have legislative priorities, not just what we can get, but stuff we can fight for, bills that we can fight for. We know that the compromise has to come here, but there has to be a movement that demands some things are not about compromise. You know, some people in this country, black folk and Native Americans, we know a lot about compromise. We always came out on the wrong end of the stick. And then thirdly, we've got to have a situation where, as I said, we lift the poor. We have stages where the poor can talk. Debates where when we set the rules of debate in a presidential election, make sure that there are at least 2 or 3 of them where poor folk ask the questions, not just talking heads. And you cannot change the narrative unless you change the narration, or the narrator, excuse me. And on the question of right now, for instance, I want to challenge us on one area. You know, everybody's talking about Russia. We don't know exactly what Russia, maybe y'all do because you've been in some meeting, but we don't know exactly what Russia did or did. But we know what voter suppression has done. And yet that's the most under-talked about story, even among our friends. Even among our friends. We haven't heard talking about we're going to fight for full restoration of the Voting Rights Act. We're going to fight for, full, not as a major issue. And we get tricked into talking about racism when Roseanne Barr says something. And we don't deal with the systemic racism and how it connects to the systemic poverty. And then my friend from Harlan County, when I went there, they said, nobody comes to see us. How are we going to be effective and efficient? We got to go to Harlan County. They told me not to go there, Senator Warren. They said, if you go to Harlan County, it's 89% voted for Republican. You can't organize in Harlan County. Didn't we come to Harlan County? We had over 450 people in Harlan County. The Hatfields and the McCoys sat in the same room. Now, you know that's a miracle. And as we said, we've got to be efficient people say, you can't bring Jews and Christian and Muslim together. Well, we're doing it. You can't bring gay folk and straight folk and black, we're doing it. You can't have a mama from West Virginia connect with a black woman from Alabama. Yes, you can. In fact, that's the only way. And then lastly, we've got to talk about these issues as interlocking injustices. And that requires an intersectional response. And it has to be, as I said earlier, a moral issue. That's why we have 120 partners now. We can't wait, lastly, until election year to organize. We've got to have a movement, not a moment, but a movement. We can't have an election year, everybody come out, then after election we go home. We're talking about building a movement because one of the things, the Senator, to your point, and folk, we've got to fight in the places they've said, like the South. Now, I don't know how many people know this, but there are 171 electoral votes from Maryland to Texas. And right now today, if you register 30% of the unregistered black votes and they connect with progressive whites and Native Americans and Latinos, you could change the South and fundamentally change the country. But that's not going to happen if people just keep trying to find a path to victory rather than fighting in the whole country. And we believe that's what a movement has to do. Our job, I think it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt that told A. Philip Randolph, go make me do it. When Dr. King came to Lyndon Baines Johnson, he said, go out and make me do it. He created Selma to Montgomery. That's what this movement is going to do. It's going to push, that's why we're not in any party, but push the issues, push the faces, make the connection. We're going to register people in poor and impacted community. We're building power. We're going to show people that a brother from Appalachia can hook up with a Apache from Arizona. And not just hook up for his issue, but the brother from Appalachia can say, I haven't won until my sister wins on the Apache stronghold, and she can say my Apache people haven't won until my brother in Appalachia. That's the kind of movement that we're committed to build, and that's why people say, before this movement fails, we'll all go down in jail. I want folks to understand, this is just the launch. And what you've helped us do today, in '68, they didn't get to talk in here. So one of the things we can help to be efficient is help us, this video, put it everywhere. Let America see it. And anytime you have an issue that you want to put a face on it, we got the faces and we got the facts. You got the force of political power. Let's put all that together and make some things happen.
So thank you. What can I say? You know, you make notes when you get a chance to listen to people. And I think the one that's etched on my heart from today is do not waste my pain. Do not waste my pain. Do not waste my pain. How many times each of you said, do not separate us? I haven't won until my sister wins. That this is a moral issue. It's an economic issue. It's a political issue. It's a policy issue, but it is a moral issue, first, last, and at every space in between. I think about the change in America. And the change in America is not poverty. We've had poverty for far too long in this country. The change in America is not the environmental catastrophes that our giant corporations are wrecking on this nation. That's been happening for a long time now. The change is not even that this government works better and better and better for those who are rich and leaves everyone else further and further behind. No, the change right now, the change at this moment is the number of people who are coming off the sidelines. It's the number of people who are saying, my voice will be heard. The number of people who see citizenship differently. You know, I talk to people all the time who say, I vote. I used to, I keep up with an occasional, I watch the news a little bit. That made me a good American citizen. who now say that's not enough. That's not nearly enough. And the number of people in the last year and a half who've started to ask the question, what does it mean to live a moral life? What is the requirement put on me as a human being? What is it I owe to my fellow human beings? You know, that's the change in America as I see it. People are coming off the sidelines. And what you tell us today is about what we see, it's about what we hear, most of all, it's about what we feel. And what has to come out of this is don't waste my pain. We're going to make change from this. Don't waste my pain. Thank you. Thank you all for being here.